The bloodline is broken. And if you think what happened to Roman Reigns was brutal, wait until you see what Jacob Fatu just did to the so-called future of WWE Bron Breakker and that mountain of destruction Bronson Reed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing the most vicious display of dominance in modern WWE history, and Triple H just let it happen. The Tribal Combat Chief has officially snapped, and two of WWE's biggest rising stars just learned why you never cross the Samoan werewolf. Pause for dramatic effect. Before we dive into this absolute carnage that has the wrestling world in complete shock, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about WWE's current landscape. Hit that like button if you're ready for the truth, because this story goes deeper than just a beatdown. This is about respect, legacy, and why Jacob Fatu just became the most feared man in all of professional wrestling. The setup that nobody saw coming. Let me paint you the picture of how we got here, because the WWE Universe deserves to know the real story behind this explosive confrontation that has everyone talking. For weeks, we've watched Roman Reigns struggle with the fractures in his bloodline. Solo Sikoa's betrayal, the constant questioning of his authority, and the emergence of new threats have left the head of the table looking more vulnerable than we've ever seen him. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is something the dirt sheets got completely wrong. Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed didn't just randomly decide to target Roman Reigns. This was orchestrated, calculated, and designed to send a message to the entire bloodline structure. Sources close to the situation are telling us that both superstars felt they were being held back by WWE's obsession with the bloodline storyline, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. Breakker, with his legitimate amateur wrestling background and that Steiner intensity flowing through his veins, believed he could single-handedly dismantle what he saw as an outdated faction. Reed, the Australian powerhouse who's been absolutely demolishing everyone in his path, saw this as his opportunity to prove that size and strength trump bloodline politics. They thought they could expose Roman Reigns as a paper champion protected by his cousins. They were dead wrong. The attack that changed everything. What happened to Roman Reigns last week was beyond brutal, it was personal. Breakker and Reed didn't just attack the tribal chief, they humiliated him. They made him look weak in front of his own family, in front of the WWE Universe, and most importantly, in front of Jacob Fatu. And that last part? That was their biggest mistake. The attack itself was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Breakker used his amateur wrestling skills to ground Roman, controlling him in a way we rarely see anyone do to the head of the table. Meanwhile, Reed used his 330-pound frame like a wrecking ball, delivering punishment that would end most careers. They isolated Roman from any potential backup, timing their assault perfectly when the rest of the bloodline was dealing with their own issues. But here's what neither Breakker nor Reed understood about Samoan culture, about family honor, and about the bond that exists between cousins who grew up in the wrestling business. When you attack one member of the family, especially in the disrespectful way they attacked Roman, you're not just declaring war on an individual, you're declaring war on an entire legacy. Jacob Fatu felt that attack in his soul. This wasn't just his cousin being beaten down, this was his family's honor being trampled on national television. And in Samoan tradition, that kind of disrespect can only be answered with overwhelming force. The Samoan werewolf unleashed now. Let me tell you about Jacob Fatu's mindset going into this confrontation, because this is where the story gets absolutely incredible. Fatu wasn't just angry. Anger doesn't even begin to describe what was flowing through his veins. This man was operating on a level of focused rage that we've never seen before in WWE. Those who know Fatu personally have described his mental state leading up to this moment as transcendent fury. He wasn't eating, he wasn't sleeping properly, and he was spending hours in the gym working on combinations that would maximize damage in the shortest amount of time. This wasn't going to be a wrestling match, this was going to be a lesson in respect delivered through violence. The preparation was meticulous. Fatu studied hours of tape on both Breakker and Reed, identifying their weaknesses, their tendencies, and most importantly, their pain thresholds. He worked with trainers who specialized in combat sports to develop strategies that would neutralize Breakker's wrestling advantages and Reed's size benefits. But beyond the physical preparation, there was something spiritual happening with Jacob Fatu. Family members close to the situation describe him performing traditional Samoan rituals, connecting with ancestors, and drawing power from generations of warriors who came before him. This wasn't just Jacob Fatu preparing for a fight, this was the manifestation of centuries of Samoan warrior culture focusing itself into one devastating evening of retribution. The hunt begins. The beauty of Jacob Fatu's revenge wasn't just in its brutality, it was in its intelligence. Rather than rushing into a confrontation where Breakker and Reed might have numerical advantages or environmental factors working in their favor, Fatu chose to hunt them separately, methodically, like the predator his nickname suggests. The first target was Bron Breakker, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Breakker was leaving the arena after what he thought was a successful night, probably feeling satisfied with how he and Reed had dominated Roman Reigns. He was walking to his rental car, probably already mentally preparing for social media posts about how he'd exposed the head of the table as nothing more than hype. That's when Jacob Fatu struck. But here's what makes this even more incredible. Fatu didn't just attack Breakker randomly. He waited until Breakker was in the parking garage, isolated from cameras, from officials, from anyone who might interfere. This was going to be pure, unfiltered justice, and Fatu wanted zero interruptions. The first shot came from behind, a devastating superkick that sent Breakker crashing into the side of a concrete pillar. But that was just the beginning. Fatu had studied Breakker's amateur wrestling background and knew that giving him any opportunity to use his technical skills would be a mistake. So instead of engaging in a grappling exchange, Fatu turned this into a striking clinic. Breakker's destruction, what Jacob Fatu did to Bron Breakker in that parking garage, will be talked about for decades. This wasn't just a beating, this was a systematic dismantling of everything Breakker represented. Every shot was deliberate, every impact designed to send a message not just to Breakker, but to anyone else who might consider disrespecting the bloodline. Fatu's striking game has always been underestimated. People focus on his size, his agility, his high-flying abilities, but they forget that this man has legitimate combat sports training. The combinations he unleashed on Breakker were textbook precision: jabs to set up power shots, leg kicks to compromise mobility, and body shots that would make even heavyweight boxers wince. Breakker tried to fight back. Give him credit, even caught off guard, even outmatched, the man tried to use his wrestling skills to change the dynamic. He shot for takedowns, attempted to clinch, even tried to create distance to reset the fight. None of it mattered. Jacob Fatu had prepared for every single thing Breakker might attempt, and he had answers that were more devastating than the questions. The most brutal moment came when Breakker finally managed to get Fatu against a car and thought he had an opportunity to use his strength advantage. Fatu let him think that for exactly 3 seconds before exploding with an uppercut that lifted Breakker completely off his feet. The sound of that impact echoed through the entire parking garage, and security cameras caught the moment Breakker's eyes rolled back in his head. But Fatu wasn't finished. He grabbed Breakker by the throat and delivered a message that sources close to the situation say was heard clearly despite the lack of audio on security footage. "You want to hurt my family? Now you learn what that costs." What followed was a superkick so devastating that it sent Breakker crashing through the rear windshield of a parked car. Glass everywhere, car alarm blaring, and Bron Breakker laid out unconscious in a pile of automotive debris. The future of WWE had just met the present reality of Samoan justice. The Reed reckoning, but Jacob Fatu wasn't done. Not even close. While medical personnel were still trying to figure out how badly injured Bron Breakker was, Fatu was already tracking his second target. Bronson Reed had made the mistake of thinking that what happened to Breakker was an isolated incident, that maybe Fatu had gotten lucky, that maybe Reed's size and power would be enough to handle whatever the Samoan werewolf could dish out. Reed was about to learn why that kind of thinking gets you destroyed in this business. Finding Reed wasn't difficult. The Australian powerhouse was in the hotel bar, probably celebrating what he considered a successful evening. Sources tell us he was actually bragging to other wrestlers about how easy it had been to dominate Roman Reigns, how the bloodline was nothing but smoke and mirrors, and how he and Breakker were about to take over WWE. The conversation stopped the moment Jacob Fatu walked into that hotel bar. The atmosphere changed instantly. Other wrestlers cleared out. Staff members suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. Even Reed, for all his bravado and size advantages, felt the shift in energy. This wasn't going to be a conversation, this was going to be an education in consequences. Fatu approached Reed's table with the kind of calm confidence that only comes from knowing you're about to unleash absolute destruction. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, letting Reed understand exactly what was about to happen and why it was inevitable. Reed, to his credit, stood up to face what was coming. At 330 pounds and with legitimate strength advantages, he probably thought he could handle whatever Jacob Fatu wanted to bring. He was about to discover that size doesn't matter when you're facing someone operating on a completely different level of intensity. The hotel bar destruction, what happened in that hotel bar, has become the stuff of wrestling legend, and we're still getting details from witnesses who were brave enough to stay and watch. Jacob Fatu didn't just fight Bronson Reed, he dominated him in ways that defied physics and redefined what we thought was possible in terms of one person dismantling another. The fight started when Reed threw the first punch, a haymaker that would have knocked out most wrestlers. Fatu slipped it like a professional boxer, and his counter was a combination that landed so fast witnesses say it looked like Reed was getting hit by multiple people simultaneously. Left hook to the body, right uppercut to the jaw, spinning back fist that connected with surgical precision. Reed stumbled backward, crashing into tables and chairs, but his size kept him upright. That's when Fatu demonstrated why he's called the Samoan werewolf. Instead of pressing forward immediately, he stalked Reed around the bar area, letting the Australian powerhouse understand that there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no way this was ending until Fatu decided it was over. Reed tried to use the environment to his advantage, grabbing chairs, throwing bottles, even attempting to put a table between himself and Fatu. None of it mattered. Jacob Fatu moved through that hotel bar like a force of nature, destroying everything in his path while systematically dismantling one of WWE's most powerful superstars. The most incredible moment came when Reed, desperate and running out of options, charged at Fatu with everything he had. 330 pounds of Australian fury, moving at full speed, convinced that his size and momentum would finally give him an advantage. Fatu caught him in mid-charge with a Samoan drop that sent Reed crashing through the hotel bar's front window. Glass exploded everywhere. Car alarms went off in the street. Hotel guests came running to see what had happened. And in the middle of all that chaos, Jacob Fatu stood over Bronson Reed's unconscious body and delivered a message that witnesses say was heard clearly despite all the noise: "Nobody hurts my family without consequences." The message sent the aftermath of Jacob Fatu's destruction of both Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed sent shockwaves through WWE that are still being felt. This wasn't just about settling a score, this was about establishing a new level of dominance and making it clear that the Bloodline isn't just a wrestling faction, it's a family with the power and willingness to defend itself by any means necessary. Medical reports on both Breakker and Reed read like casualty lists from a war zone. Breakker suffered a severe concussion, multiple lacerations from the car window glass, bruised ribs, and what doctors described as extensive soft tissue damage consistent with prolonged physical trauma. Reed's injuries were even more severe: broken nose, fractured orbital bone, dislocated shoulder from the window crash, and internal bruising that required immediate medical attention. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the psychological impact. Both wrestlers, who had been riding high on their perceived dominance over Roman Reigns, were suddenly faced with the reality that actions have consequences in the Bloodline universe. Sources close to both men described them as shaken and re-evaluating their career decisions. The wrestling world took notice immediately. Social media exploded with reactions from current wrestlers, legends, and fans who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some called it excessive, others called it justice, but everyone agreed on one thing: Jacob Fatu had just announced himself as the most dangerous man in WWE. Triple H's impossible decision behind the scenes. This situation has created an absolute nightmare for WWE management, particularly Triple H, who now has to figure out how to handle a situation that went way beyond the boundaries of typical wrestling storylines. How do you discipline someone for defending their family? How do you punish Jacob Fatu for doing exactly what any loyal cousin would do in his position? Sources within WWE tell us that there have been heated discussions about potential suspensions, fines, and even termination for Fatu. But here's the problem: everything he did was in response to an unprovoked attack on his family member. From a storyline perspective, he's the hero. From a legal perspective, he was defending a family member who had been assaulted. From a business perspective, the footage of his retaliation has generated more buzz than WWE has seen in months. The situation is so complex that WWE's legal team has been involved in discussions about how to proceed. They can't publicly condone what Fatu did, but they also can't ignore the fact that fan reaction has been overwhelmingly supportive of his actions. Social media metrics show engagement levels through the roof, merchandise sales for Bloodline-related items have spiked dramatically, and ticket sales for upcoming events have shown significant increases in markets where this story is being heavily promoted. Triple H is reportedly torn between his responsibilities as an executive and his understanding as a former wrestler who knows exactly what family means in this business. Those close to the situation say he's been having private conversations with veterans like The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, trying to get perspective on how to handle a talent who crossed lines for all the right reasons. The Bloodline's new dynamic: what Jacob Fatu's actions have done is completely reshaped the power dynamics within the Bloodline itself. For months, we've been watching Roman Reigns struggle with challenges to his authority from Solo Sikoa, questions about his leadership, and the general sense that maybe his time as the head of the table was coming to an end. All of that changed the moment Fatu decided to hunt down Breakker and Reed. Suddenly, Roman Reigns isn't the only enforcer in the family. Suddenly, there's someone who's willing to take violence to levels that even Roman might not be comfortable with. And suddenly, the entire WWE roster has to recalculate their approach to dealing with the Bloodline. Roman's reaction to what his cousin did has been fascinating to watch. Sources tell us he was simultaneously proud of Fatu's loyalty and concerned about the potential consequences. The head of the table has always prided himself on being strategic, on thinking several moves ahead, on controlling situations through intelligence as much as force. What Fatu did was pure instinct, pure emotion, pure family loyalty taken to its logical extreme. But here's what's really interesting: Roman hasn't criticized Fatu's actions publicly or privately. When asked by WWE officials about the situation, Roman reportedly said simply, "He defended our family. That's what family does." That response tells you everything you need to know about how the Bloodline views loyalty, respect, and consequences. The dynamic between Roman and Jacob has also evolved in ways that have other WWE superstars nervous. Before this incident, Jacob was clearly the cousin who followed Roman's lead, who deferred to the head of the table's judgment, who played his role within the established hierarchy. Now, Jacob has proven that he's willing to act independently when family honor is at stake, and that independence comes with a level of devastating effectiveness that nobody anticipated. The fear factor. The most significant change in WWE's landscape isn't just what Jacob Fatu did to Breakker and Reed, it's how every other wrestler on the roster is now looking at the Bloodline. Before this incident, wrestlers might have been willing to test the boundaries, to push back against Bloodline dominance, to see if they could find cracks in the foundation. After what happened to Breakker and Reed, that kind of thinking has completely disappeared. Wrestlers who were previously critical of the Bloodline's prominence are suddenly much more respectful in their comments. Superstars who might have considered targeting Roman Reigns are reconsidering their strategies. And anyone who might have thought about making their name by taking down a Bloodline member is having serious second thoughts about the potential consequences. This fear factor extends beyond just individual wrestlers. Entire factions are reconsidering how they approach storylines involving the Bloodline. Tag teams are being more careful about how they interact with Roman and his family. Even main event players are adjusting their behavior because nobody wants to be the next example of what happens when you cross the line with Jacob Fatu's family. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Wrestling is a business built on the illusion of toughness, where everyone talks about being the toughest, the strongest, the most dangerous. But when someone actually demonstrates that level of real-world consequence, when someone shows they're willing to take things to places that others aren't prepared to go, it changes everything. Backstage reactions. The reaction from other wrestlers has been a fascinating mix of respect, concern, and genuine fear. Veterans who have seen everything in their careers are saying that what Jacob Fatu did reminded them of stories from wrestling's more dangerous eras, when consequences were real and personal grudges could turn genuinely dangerous. Some wrestlers have privately expressed concern that Fatu's actions set a precedent that could lead to escalating violence. If someone can justify hunting down opponents and delivering that level of punishment outside of sanctioned matches, where does it end? What happens when other wrestlers decide to take similar approaches to settling scores? But others, particularly wrestlers who understand the importance of family and wrestling culture, have been completely supportive. They see Jacob Fatu as someone who did exactly what any loyal family member should do when their cousin is attacked and humiliated. They respect the fact that he was willing to put his own career at risk to defend Roman Reigns and the family honor. The most telling reactions have come from wrestlers who have had previous issues with the Bloodline. Multiple sources tell us that several superstars who had been planning angles or storylines that would put them in conflict with Roman Reigns have quietly asked for those plans to be changed. Nobody wants to be in a position where they might provoke the kind of response that Breakker and Reed experienced. Even wrestlers who aren't directly involved with Bloodline storylines are being more careful about their comments and actions. The understanding now is that the Bloodline isn't just a wrestling faction, they're a family with someone who's willing to enforce family rules with extreme prejudice. The business impact. From a pure business perspective, what Jacob Fatu did has created a phenomenon that WWE hasn't seen in years. The combination of shocking violence, family loyalty, and genuine unpredictability has generated the kind of buzz that money can't buy. Social media engagement is through the roof, with fans creating memes, reaction videos, and endless discussions about whether Fatu's actions were justified. Merchandise sales tell the story even more clearly. Bloodline-related items have seen sales increases of over 300% since the incident. Jacob Fatu's individual merchandise, which was already popular, has completely sold out across multiple platforms. Even Roman Reigns' merchandise has seen renewed interest as fans connect his leadership with his family's loyalty. Ticket sales for upcoming WWE events have shown dramatic increases in markets where this storyline is being heavily promoted. Fans want to see what happens next. They want to know if there will be consequences for Fatu's actions. They want to understand how this changes the entire landscape of WWE programming. Television ratings have also responded positively. The episodes featuring coverage of the incident and its aftermath have shown significant viewership increases, particularly in the key demographic categories that advertisers care about most. The unpredictability factor, the sense that anything could happen when the Bloodline is involved, has brought back viewers who had become complacent with WWE's programming. The larger implications. What Jacob Fatu did to Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed represents more than just one night of violence, it represents a fundamental shift in how WWE storylines can develop and what fans can expect from their entertainment. For years, wrestling fans have complained that modern WWE is too sanitized, too predictable, too safe in its storytelling approaches. Jacob Fatu's actions shattered those complaints in the most dramatic way possible. Suddenly, there are real consequences for actions. Suddenly, family loyalty means something more than just wearing matching t-shirts. Suddenly, crossing certain lines can result in outcomes that go far beyond losing a match or being embarrassed on television. This shift has implications that extend throughout the entire wrestling industry. Other promotions are watching to see how WWE handles this situation and what it might mean for their own storytelling approaches. Independent wrestlers are studying the response to understand what modern fans really want from their wrestling entertainment. Even international wrestling companies are taking notes on how genuine emotion and family loyalty can create compelling narratives. The authenticity of Jacob Fatu's motivation, defending his family's honor, resonates with fans in ways that manufactured storylines never could. There's something primal about watching someone willing to risk everything to protect their family, something that connects with basic human emotions and values that transcend wrestling fandom. The future landscape looking ahead. The question isn't just what happens to Jacob Fatu, Bron Breakker, and Bronson Reed, it's what this incident means for the entire future of WWE programming. How do you follow up on something this impactful? How do you create storylines that match the intensity and authenticity of what just happened? The answer might be that you don't try to match it, you build on it. Jacob Fatu has created a new standard for what family loyalty looks like in WWE, and that standard can influence storylines throughout the company. Other factions might need to demonstrate similar levels of commitment to their chosen families. Individual wrestlers might need to show greater consequences for their actions and greater loyalty to their alliances. This could mark the beginning of a more mature, more emotionally resonant era in WWE programming. Instead of cartoon characters with manufactured motivations, we might see more wrestlers whose actions are driven by genuine emotions, real relationships, and authentic consequences. The Bloodline itself is now positioned as something more than just another wrestling faction. They're a family with proven willingness to defend each other by any means necessary. That positioning creates opportunities for storytelling that goes beyond traditional wrestling narratives into territory that feels more real, more meaningful, and more emotionally engaging. The ultimate question as we process everything that happened and everything it means, we're left with one ultimate question that will define how this story continues. Was Jacob Fatu right? Did Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed deserve what happened to them? When you attack someone's family member, when you humiliate them on national television, when you show complete disrespect for their culture and their values, do the normal rules still apply? Does someone have the right to seek the kind of justice that Jacob Fatu delivered? The answer to that question probably depends on your own values, your own understanding of family loyalty, and your own perspective on consequences and responsibility. But what's undeniable is that Jacob Fatu answered that question definitively with his actions, and his answer has changed everything. For Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed, the answer came in the form of devastating physical consequences that will follow them for the rest of their careers. For the WWE Universe, the answer came in the form of entertainment that felt more real, more emotionally authentic, and more impactful than anything they'd seen in years. For Jacob Fatu himself, the answer came in the form of proving that some things, family, loyalty, honor, are worth risking everything to defend. Conclusion: a new era. What we witnessed wasn't just Jacob Fatu destroying two wrestlers who crossed his family, it was the birth of a new era in WWE where actions have real consequences, where family loyalty isn't just a catchphrase, and where crossing certain lines can result in the kind of justice that changes careers and lives. The Samoan werewolf didn't just hunt down Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed, he redefined what it means to be part of the Bloodline, what it costs to disrespect that family, and what modern wrestling fans want from their entertainment. He created a moment that will be remembered not just for its brutality, but for its authenticity, its emotional truth, and its demonstration that some values are worth fighting for no matter what the consequences might be. The wrestling world is still processing what happened, still trying to understand what it means, and still wondering what comes next. But one thing is absolutely certain: nobody will ever look at Jacob Fatu, the Bloodline, or the concept of family loyalty in WWE the same way again. The message has been sent, received, and understood throughout the entire wrestling world. You can attack the Bloodline if you want, but you better be prepared for the consequences. And those consequences, as Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed learned the hard way, are more devastating than anything you could possibly imagine. This is just the beginning of what promises to be the most intense, emotionally authentic, and genuinely unpredictable era in modern WWE history. And it all started with one man's unwavering loyalty to his family and his willingness to do whatever it takes to protect what matters most. The tribal combat chief has spoken, and the entire wrestling world is listening. End of script. *. Remember to smash that like button if this breakdown opened your eyes to what really happened. Subscribe for more exclusive wrestling content, and let me know in the comments whether you think Jacob Fatu was justified in what he did to Breakker and Reed. The wrestling world will never be the same, and we'll be here to cover every explosive moment as this story continues to unfold. *.